Thank you, folks. We're honored to have people who you must be very close to by now. We have the director, Ondi Timoner, and of course, her sister, Rabbi Rachel Timoner. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
I have to breathe a little bit. It's really one of the most intense experiences, and thank you so much for such a beautiful film, such a brave film. And I want to start by asking, why did you want to make this film?
I didn't set out to make this film. I just was so terrified of losing Dad and not remembering him. When he had the stroke, I was 9.5, and I don't remember. I'm not able to remember him in any of the images in my head or moving images in my head from before that time. I think as soon as Dad's in the picture, he's just not, I can't see him. So I was worried to not be able to hear his voice again and to have his personality. I just wanted to bottle him up somehow. And I was really worried about the effect it would have on my family, and also whether I was, trying to mediate somehow with the camera. So I went to see somebody about it because I was just like, I feel like my dad wants to die, and I feel like I need to set up cameras, and is this a terrible mistake? And thankfully she said, no, if you feel like you need to set up cameras, you should. And so really it was my way of surviving to do that. And then my family's used to having me film. Oh, darn. Oh, well, you'll have to see it again. That's him. I'm singing Row, 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 Row Your Boat to him. And then he comes in with Life is But a Dream. That's what that was. Anyway, Rachel asked me to make a memorial video because I had this footage. And that's what started it. I just couldn't stop editing. He was alive inside the Avid, and it was a few weeks after. It was March 21st that we had the memorial, so it was just a couple weeks after he died. And I had the footage. It was just so incredibly full of light and love and lessons that needed to be shared. And I just kept editing, and suddenly there was a feature. Yeah, it was the most unconscious film I've really ever made. It was like almost involuntary. So
Tells itself in many ways. I mentioned earlier that showing this now at this time of year is just so meaningful, and for both of you. But I want to start with Rachel. I'm looking at this in these days, and it's kind of actually amazing that you put in that speech from Yom Kippur at the end. But looking at it now, a year later, what have you learned?
Well, I just want to start by thanking everybody for being here. It's really meaningful to have you see, our dad, and just I caught the very end, so I saw my bits of my sermon from last Kol Nidre, and I'm like this morning was writing my sermon for this Kol Nidre, and so what have I learned? I have learned, first of all, to come out about this. I was really troubled when Ondi first was realizing she was making a film. I didn't want it in the world. I felt like this was so intensely private. I didn't want people to see this. This was ours. It didn't belong to anybody else, and I didn't want people to see our dad dying. I felt private, and I was really unhappy with the idea that it was going to be a film. And then also I had this secondary concern, which is that what he chose to do violates Jewish law, not just in Orthodox Jewish law, but even the Reform movement at the time that he did this called this murder. And I'm a Reform rabbi, and I took that really seriously. And I there was no question in my mind when he asked me to help him that I was going to be by his side and do whatever he needed. I had no doubt about that. But it's a different thing to be publicly in the world portrayed this way, and then also therefore needing to advocate for what I do believe. And I had not chosen this. I'm an activist about a lot of things, but I had not chosen this as an issue that I was going to go out in the world to fight for, and now suddenly here I am. And so a lot of what I learned this year was like to kind of step into that and say, yeah, actually I do believe this, and to see the impact that this film has had on other people, I do feel very comfortable now sharing it in that, in terms of it being private. I feel the impact it's affecting people in such beautiful ways that I feel like it's totally worth the issues of my own privacy. I'm willing to give that up. And in terms of taking a stand, the reform movement has actually changed its position. There's a new responsum from this year that supports medical aid in dying in Canada, and in a very thoughtful responsum. They've totally flipped the position. So that also changes it for me. But also I had already come to a place of feeling like even if that wasn't the case, I was ready to kind of stand up for this.
And if you have not read Rachel's piece in the forward on this topic relating to it, that's also a good point. That's a good point of reference. Is there a better one, or that's the good one? And what have you taken from this in the last? I guess the film's been public for the last since Sundance, so over 6 months.
Well, it was interesting because we played Sundance, but it was virtual because of Omicron, and so we actually threw it to Telluride in sort of a Hail Mary because it was about, our father, and I just didn't feel like it was pegged to any particular time and it needed to be at Sundance. So I was ready to just push and not do Sundance, but Telluride accepted the film in January, but said, you can play Sundance because we love your father and his role model should be out there as long as possible, but you have to go quiet with the film until Telluride. So we actually just played Telluride, and it was the first time that we really got to be with audiences. And it was an incredible experience. So I didn't really go through this year getting to share this film. This is really the beginning of that right now. This is the first screening in New York, and next week we have preview screenings, and then it opens here, and then we go to London and LA, and so it all starts now. But like Rachel said, the response to the film has been, I've never created anything in my life that has this kind of healing power within it. People have called parents that they've been estranged from for years. People have held hands with strangers, and just all kinds of connections internally and externally have already been made, and it's just the beginning. So I feel like in a way it makes me question, what is it to be truly alive or dead? Because our father was trapped in a chair. The decline was pretty serious over many years, but he was, first he was paralyzed for 40 years, and we saw him lose so much that he, of material things, right? And also his ability to drive and basic things that we take for granted. But then in the last decade, he really, and certainly COVID, he fell so many times, and it was so hard. And he was, just a person in a house, and there's so many treasure troves that are stuck in chairs, and the fact that his story and his essence is now able to kind of affect people like this. It's almost like it's him acting from beyond the grave, I feel like it's like this ball of light that I have to be very careful with and preserve as much as possible. Yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't feel like a film to me.
And it's different than anything I think I've ever seen or what we've shown here. We have a fabulous program that I mentioned that partnered with us tonight, the What Matters program, and we try to find ways to bring the community to talk about this topic that is the biggest part of our lives. Everybody will experience this, and how to talk about it and to make a movie about it, which movies we associate with entertainment, with, you hear Sundance Film Festival, you're picturing Robert Redford on a red carpet. And to bring this topic is just such an important thing. And to be able to talk about it in such a meaningful way, I think, as the film brings up, is really something that's very brave. And the question now is, how do you engage the community around that? How do you get the community to talk about this more, not to be afraid to talk about it?
Yeah, I think that's the hurdle the film has, is how to, hopefully all of you will tell everybody to see it. That's the only way, because if on paper it's like, oh no, do I want to see this? This is scary, because we don't have a lot of representations of a good death, or the kind of beauty and grace that surrounds an experience. Like, this was the most sacred experience, one of the greatest, if not the greatest experience of my life. Not the moment he died, and that was very tough, and I left that in because it's an important topic. As we get into medical aid of dying, which is only not even a right here for you in New York yet, but we're going to hopefully help with that. There's a lot of nuances to how it happens, and that's something else. But the fact that he had the power to make that choice was so important to him, and the fact that we had these days to work with him, to have him realize that he gave us everything when he thought he was a failure, was, I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have that kind of closure with him. So it was a great gift, and I think that, I hope that it helps everyone who sees it cope with their own loss, because we all have it, like you said,
One of the things that happened for me in this last year is after I wrote the piece in the foreword, which I was really frightened about what kind of response I would get from people, whether I'd really be condemned. And I was not at all. And I had more than 100 responses, and to a person were people writing about their own loved ones who had a horrific end of life with, drawn out agony, and how much they wished that they had this. And including rabbis who wrote and said, I would never do what you're doing. It's really brave. People, are going to attack you. But honestly, I wish my father had this. I wish my mother had this. I wish my spouse had this. And so it's made me realize and I already as a rabbi have been with so many people at end of life who, I had a member who died of ALS and was just like desperately trying to figure out how he could be able to make his own choice at the end of life, and couldn't. And so I've definitely, it's making me more and more clear that this is a topic we do need to share with people and have a conversation. It's not simple. It's complex. There are challenges. There are reasons to be opposed to this, but we need to have the conversation.
We had people come up at, was it to you, at Telluride, saying, I'm a veterinarian, and we treat our pets better than we treat people at the end of their lives. Yeah.
I want to make our community a part of this conversation too, and open it for questions. I'll just ask one last question. Were you surprised at all by your father's decision? From the movie,
I was shocked. I mean, he was the most tenacious person. He always said to me he'd be there for this. He'd be there for see my son go to college. I remember saying to him one of those days, like, you're not going to know where Zhuki's going to college. And he said, oh, I will. I'll be watching. Yeah.
One of the things is Ondi tried to get me to record my phone conversations with my dad, because I was here in New York, and we had many conversations, and I am like anti-recording all things. I don't know why, but I was like, I'm not. This is live and it's happening right now. It's just between us, and I'm not recording it. But of course, I wish that I had. Sometimes she's right. But anyway,
this is being recorded, by the way.
Yeah. Sure. But he would call me multiple times a day and beg me to help him die. Before this starts, like before you see this start, he was calling me and saying, please, Rachel, please, you have to help me. You know about this. You know about end of life. You have to help me. You have to help me die. And yeah, I was shocked. That was never, ever what he'd wanted. It's never how he'd been. I obviously had no ability to make that happen. I started teaching him some different meditations that he could do to just kind of like imagine releasing life, and different kind of visualizations, but he was asking for me to do this. And I didn't even know, we didn't even know about the California law. None of us did. And so we were just like, that's not possible.
No, he was saying, he was in the hospital, and he was telling me if I loved him, to come in there and kill him, help him, like die. And I was like, I can't even get in there because of COVID, But he had breathing problems. So he was in there sort of he didn't know that he'd be going that morning. A social worker made that choice to send him to the hospital because he had COPD. And then I think it was really him realizing that he wasn't going to walk again, and that he just was going to have to go to a facility. And he lived for us. He lived to be around us.
But the thing I want to make sure we convey is like he was desperate, and I have seen this before with people where sometimes at the end of life people they're done, they have lived fully, they've done everything they can to fully do their living, and then they're done, and they desperately need to leave the world, and that was what was happening with our dad.
He said, "I served my sentence." He told me once. I dug through the footage to try to find it to put it in the movie, but he said, "I've done my time. I've served my sentence." So.
I saw some hands up right here. We'll pass the microphone around.
We have a microphone.
Hi. Well, thank you so much. For sharing with that. And like you said, just being able to watch that during these high holy days is really special. I went to synagogue for the first time in like 10 years for Rosh Hashanah, and it was, a surreal experience, at times good, times bad, but it was, watching this movie was so special and such a reminder how art can be such a spiritual, religious experience as well. So I wanted to say that. Something else that I experienced during the movie that I thought was so beautiful was the way you really showed the loving, the family attributes of losing a loved one, and also the systems that are in place with figuring out bills and kind of all of these two things that you have to grapple with at the end of a life. And I was wondering, even all of the Biden-Harris stuff, it was so obvious that we're the film and our whole lives exist in these systems. And I was wondering if you were cognizant of that as you were making the movie, and that was something that you really wanted to show in the film.
Yeah, thank you, first of all. Thank you so much for that statement about art. I agree. It really was a spiritual experience for me to make this. And watching our mom, the way it helped her was the first indication we had of just how, she watched it every night for like the first year. Yeah. Now there's a trailer, so she can watch something shorter and get on with her life. But yeah, the bills were so important to me to put in, because I was just like, the minutia that we deal with, that we worry about, that we memorize, the lists and the lists and the lists, and then it's like, to see him struggling with that, or even thinking about calling Bank of America, I was just like, oh God, it's just.
Well, also there's a whole through line about money, like for him, a huge amount of his sense of worth. It's obvious. It's
in our
said
society
explicitly in the film, but and in general in our society. But I think especially I want to say something that's maybe essentialist, but I think especially for men, and especially men of his generation, like so much of his identity was being a provider, and he felt so much of his feeling of failure and shame was about not having, by the end, having been able to do that. And so like hearing him here, like he would obsessively call Bank of America because it was such a part of his life that he was like, still trying to make sure that there was balance in the bank, and even if that balance was really, really small now. And I felt like that was part of what she was showing too, was like, that was a really big part of his daily life.
It was weighing him down to the point where, I'm just taking its toll on everybody all the time, all of us. But we saw it with him. We could feel it with him when he died, and he was light as a feather. It was just an unbelievable moment. He was just, his arm was literally like a bird's wing. It was just amazing. So
it had been impossible to move.
Yeah,
for 40 years.
Well, no, his right, even his right hand. That's true. Yeah, it was just, he was just like so burdened, and these burdens are his soul and everything. Just, there was so much light in that room. I can't even explain, just through the days. I don't know if it came through in the movie. Yeah. But I love when mom's like, choice B, and she chooses David to do the finances. And to this day, by the way, props to David, because he has taken over. She calls him her financial advisor, and then also like her medical coordinator. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's wonderful.
We have a couple of questions up on top there. No, just for the recording too, so it all comes through. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say that you had just a fabulous leading man, and I think you really did him justice. And I'd love to see your pre-planning document.
My what?
Your pre-planning document.
Oh, well, I'll tell you that I've never had a docu-star like this. No, never have I had a character as lovable and scripted either. So I totally agree with you.
I thank you, too, for this gift of being able to envision what a beautiful death can be with a loving family around. And I do hope we will be able to have this option in New York and Massachusetts, where I spend my time, and sure, the rest of the country, too. I did want to ask Rabbi Rachel about the document, the responsum. Is it something approval of Canada? What does that get us here in the States?
So it's the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and it's actually many things on that site are password protected, but they made this not password protected, so you can actually look it up. So it's the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and it's about medical aid in dying. The way the process works is that a person will ask a question, and then the committee will respond to the question. That's how Jewish law evolves. And so a person asked a question from Canada because there's a law there called medical aid in dying, and so they were looking at that law in Canada. So it does not apply to the United States right now, though. For people who may or may not know, like the Reform movement response is, halakha, Jewish law is not binding in Reform Judaism, so it's not like it's not binding. So, but they made this about Canada, and actually there's a paragraph in italics toward the top of it that says, because in the United States there is not affordable and accessible health care for everybody, we actually have concerns that people could choose this in the United States because they can't access treatment. And so, what an indictment, right? And it's real. So that's where the Reform movement is right now. They fully endorse it in Canada. They're kind of like in a wait and see about the states. They also said it varies by region and state, and so they're just not sure. They wouldn't want a situation where a person feels pressured to die, and that's really important.
Do you want to mention the podcast that we did, Exit Strategy?
Yeah, and also I wanted to say that there is a bill in New York right now. There's an organization called Compassion and Choices that's
right.
working on that bill. They screened the film to the state legislature in New York, and we were in a Q&A like this, like with his legislators, which was pretty amazing. And I've volunteered to be, vocal in any ways they need me to help pass it in New York, and I've already engaged some rabbis, and so we're working on that. But then also there's a podcast called Exit Strategy Plaza Community Chapel. Stephanie Gary has a new podcast, and I think they're going to time, when is the episode?
So our movie opens here. So we're going to Woodstock tomorrow, and then Film Festival, and then here IFC next Friday and Saturday. And Mom and David will be here too for that. So the whole family will be here.
And when is it?
And the podcast should be right around then, I would imagine. Like, I don't know, but something like that.
So she interviewed us about all of these questions, and but in terms of the CCR response, it really just applies to Canada, and also it's not binding. So it shows that the movement is it's a very big change from the position of the movement before, and so it just shows that it's changing.
And I had a call with Compassion and Choices last week. They've put it out to 150,000 members. This is the tool that they're going to use to try to change the law. And they're doing a tour, like a fall tour. So I urge you, if this is important to you, to see happen here, to get involved with them. And they'll be at the screenings at IFC as well. So, yeah.
And tell your friends to see it together. See it in a community. Don't just see it alone on Paramount Plus someday.
Thank you.
See this,
totally, yeah.
See this way. This is the way to do it.
Did it feel good to see it together? Did it, yeah?
There was a story Ondi kind of talked about, which is at Telluride, someone came out and told us that he was sitting there weeping, and there was a woman sitting next to him he never met, weeping, and she reached over and held his hand, and they sat together crying for an hour. And I was like, I'm never going to forget that. I thought that was just incredible. And so, yeah, I think we're really moved by the way that this is affecting people.
We have a question.
We're going to take 3 last questions here. 1, 2, and then one up there. 3.
So I guess I just first have to say congratulations on a truly magnificent, stunning, and powerful film. That being said, I also want to tell you that I almost didn't come because as a child I met your parents, Eli and Lisa. Yeah. And you guys look just like them. And I didn't know if I could sit through and watch Mr. Timoner and Lisa. But and I hope I can talk to you privately for a minute.
Of course.
Afterwards. Okay. So yeah, I'm
Are you from Miami?
yes.
Ah.
Yeah.
The
And-
movie's coming to Miami.
Pardon me?
We're having a special reunion screening for Air Florida.
That's
and
great.
everyone in Miami.
That's great.
November 7th. But we're actually a prayer for Florida right now.
Yes. Yeah. I live here and in LA, but I was born there and I really did know them as a young child. And I think your mom was pregnant with you, Rachel, when I last saw them. So I just want to come down and give you both a hug. But I just wanted to say publicly how extraordinary this film is. And you each had such a great role in what you did, and it was very different. But what struck me the most is how I was seeing Mr. Timoner. I mean, he, in the film, was exactly who I remembered him as. His wit, his intelligence, his warmth, all of it. So I can't wait to tell you why I know them. But yeah.
Thank you.
This was incredible.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. There's one right. You had a question, ma'am? In the red? Yeah.
It was a beautiful film. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm interested in what the experience of his shame was living in the family. Meaning, did he hold a lot of his shame without expressing it explicitly until the very end in that just magnificent moment? And was that one of the ways that he also tried to provide to the family so that he wasn't able to get any support for it?
We might have slightly different answers to this, but
Go first.
I'll say I did not. It was not named. Like I would not have been able to tell you that he had shame until very near his death. I was doing my own work on, as I always do, whatever I'm doing. I was in my own process of, therapy and life, and I suddenly realized that I thought that what was happening for him was shame, and it was like in the last year of his life. So it wasn't like we grew up. I did not grow up thinking, oh, my father has a lot of shame. I mean, certainly it was obvious after the stroke. He was frustrated. Certainly it was obvious, like his life crashed. Like he was a CEO, everything crashed. He lost all his money, he lost everything, he lost all his status. He couldn't move. He was extremely frustrated by his body. And there would be times where he'd say stuff like, I can't do that, I'm crippled, or I can't do that, I'm handicapped. Like there was a lot of, I more would say I felt self-hate coming from him, of just so frustrated with the limitations of his life and blaming himself for them. But only, for me, only in the last, year-ish did I realize, oh, shame, because I was experiencing my own shame, and I realized, I grew up with a lot of shame. And he didn't put that on me, but with that being modeled. And so when I realized that he was going to want me to be his rabbi, and I was going to be there, I thought, I wonder if we can get at this. And it went way better than I imagined, that he just completely was willing to just lay it down, to speak it and put it down and let it go. It was the most amazing thing. Yeah.
We do have different answers, but kind of there's a crossover. I think that one of the great takeaways, guides, Dad is my high mark of humanity, right? He's my model of who I aspire to be. as a person. And the thing that I admire the most, I think, is how generous of spirit he was our whole lives. So he was paralyzed since Rachel was 11 and I was 9 and David was 7.5, 8. And he rarely complained. I mean, if he rarely complained. I mean, the amount that we complain, I mean, like,
No, it's totally
he just
true.
didn't.
It's
And
absolutely
he survived by paying attention to all of us, by being our greatest champion, by rooting us on. He really lived vicariously, and there's no shame in that. You know, it was just beautiful. Like, the first call I'd get when my plane landed anywhere was him. He was tracking the flight. I'm sure it's the same for you.
For sure.
You know?
Oh, for sure.
And he would endeavor to give me advice on anything I was doing, business advice or, you know, but he would try to make peace if Mom was mad, you know, because Mom has a bit of an anger thing. And he would come in and he would just be so troubled if there was any tension in the family. You know, he was our rock. And so I feel like that grace in suffering is a model of heroism, you know, that I wanted to show to everyone. It reminds me of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, you know, and just how we suffer as an opportunity. It's hard to see it that way, you know, but an opportunity to be like him. If anything should befall you, you know, hopefully you'll remember him, because it's truly extraordinary. Now, I felt that he totally felt. I was talking with him on those calls from the hospital. If I needed to go, he wanted to talk to Rachel, and if Rachel needed to hang up, he wanted to talk to Mom. He needed to stay connected with us the entire time he was in the hospital. And he was saying the same things to me, but the other thing was that he was saying these really self-deprecating comments from the hospital. And so I sort of laid the groundwork, if I will take a little credit here, on just the Dewey, like I was the warm-up team, because for the days before Rachel came out, we did those Zoom calls, and it was just, and then people, we had appointments, people, you know, we put the word out. This is how long he's going to be alive for. Do you want to say goodbye? And people lined up, and we coordinated those calls, and it was just, everyone just filled him up, and he'd be so tired in between, but he would never say no. He'd always say yes, you know, and the next person would come in, and it would just be this, you'd just see. So by the time Rachel came along with this unbelievable Vidui, I feel like he was at a part where it was like he had enough light in him to realize, like, wait, why do I feel all this shame? And it is, maybe I do need to let it go, you know? And so that really, because when he was in the hospital, and I'll stop rambling in a second, but I really almost, like, I remember just breaking down to Morgan, my wife, who's also the composer. She's right here in front if you want to compliment the score. Yeah. I was just like, if I don't have a chance to have him leave this earth in a different frame of mind than what he's expressing right now, I don't know how I will go on. Like, I thought I might actually, this might be the end of happiness for me forever, you know? So I'm so grateful for the End of Life Option Act in California, and that he could come home and be around us and put that bed right in the middle of the living room. And, you know, it was just, I hope that, I hope you have this opportunity here, and we'll screen it as many times as we need to till that happens.
We had one last question.
So I'm the director of What Matters, the program that Yitzi has so kindly mentioned a number of times. First of all, thank you. This is the second time I've seen the film, and it was as though I was watching it the first time. There's so many layers and so much that was revealed. So thank you. One of the things that struck me was that your father was so lucid at the end, up until the very end. I mean, the jokes he told, the way he related, the wisdom that just came when you thought he was asleep and these pearls came, it was really moving. And I was thinking that, so the What Matters program is here to do just what Yitzi asked the question, how can we get the community to talk about this more? And we are here to promote advanced care planning and to have people have these conversations, because in so many cases, they're not as lucid as your father was at the end. And I was so moved by the fact that you gave all of the children the opportunities also. There's no regrets, you know, and even those who were so hesitant, you know, were allowed their time to say and to hear from their father. And I just want to say that these opportunities, as you said in your sermon, can come earlier. They don't have to come at the deathbed. So
That's
I'd
right.
like you just to say a little bit more about how we need to take these
Yeah.
opportunities.
Thank you.
earlier.
Yeah. I'm actually speaking about that this Kol Nidre. I think that you know, it's those of us who spend time with people who are dying know it's luck of the draw. Like, you just don't know. Like, yes, he had the Options Act, and yes, he had a family ready to be there with him, but he may not have been lucid. Like, lots of people are not. And so it's really important to do it long before that moment, and to say all the I'm sorries and have all the chances to forgive each other. And, you know, and maybe at the end you will also be able to do, you know, another round, and that's amazing. But for sure, in terms of advanced planning, it's so important. And I think one of the things I'm realizing is just a tremendous opportunity about this film is just to have conversations about death, like just to talk about we're all going to die, and if we pay attention to dying and turn toward it, which is, you know, everything this society is getting us is trying to get us to turn away from it. But if we turn toward it, it actually gives us such an opportunity to make choices about how we live, not only how we die, both.
This film is a true gift. Thank you for bringing this to our community. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, folks.